confrontation with the Soviet Union. So that resulted in such a tragedy. And the accountability matters for Ukraine as it matters for the entire world, since Russia, as the Soviet Union, were never brought to justice. So the next century, this century, Russia again is leading a genocidal war and using a genocidal famine to put pressure on the world community because of the dedication of the Ukrainian people and the resolution of the world community. We need to bring Russia to account. The Ukrainian warriors demonstrated by their determination on the battlefield and their strive for victory. Hopefully, our partners will share this determination to help Ukraine prevail by supporting Ukraine until we defeat our enemy. So thank you for joining us. And now we can transition to the agenda of this event and start with the presentation of the video of the Crimean Platform for Food Security.
How does the Russian war in Ukraine affect global food security? Even despite the full-scale invasion, Ukraine is among the top 10 exporters of wheat, barley, corn, rapeseed, and soybeans in the world. And in terms of sunflower and oil production, Ukraine was number one before the full-scale invasion of Russia and occupation of the southern regions of Ukraine. Ukraine exported more than 90% of agricultural products by sea because the key importers are the countries of North Africa, the Middle East, and East Asia. Now exports have become not only difficult and limited, but also extremely dangerous due to Russia's shelling of Ukrainian ports. The Russian invasion also caused the purposeful destruction of Ukrainian agricultural infrastructure. The Russians are purposefully destroying Ukrainian farms, stealing machinery, shelling businesses, mining fields, and killing leaders of the Ukrainian agricultural sector. Greenhouses, warehouses, and the product themselves undergo significant destruction. Total loss of grains and oilseeds is estimated at 485,000 tons as of October 8, 2023. In just 9 days of war and shelling of Ukrainian ports in July 2023, Russia destroyed 180,000 tons Ukrainian grain, 26 port infrastructure facilities, and 5 civilian ships. In addition, enterprises in the occupied territories, which occupy 18% of the area of Ukraine, are currently suspended. According to the latest estimates, more than 6 million tons of grain crops were stolen by the Russians from the occupied Ukrainian territories in 2022 alone. These are the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, which are the basis of Ukraine's agriculture and are currently partially occupied. On June 6, 2023, the Russians blew up the Kakhovska hydropower plant and caused a large-scale man-made ecological disaster, the consequences of which are already affecting the entire planet, especially catastrophic for the southern regions of Ukraine. Kakhov Reservoir was the main supplier of water for one of the largest irrigation systems in Europe. 1.5 million hectares of irrigated land have been lost. Fish plague has been recorded. Grease and oil stains can reach the Mediterranean, and dolphins are already dying in mass in the Black Sea. Russian occupiers have committed the biggest ecocide not only during this war, but in decades. Arable fields are filled with shells and mines. Today, Ukraine is the most mined country in the world. More than 40% of the territory of Ukraine is mined. As a result of Russia's hostilities in Ukraine, 5.5 million tons of pollutants were released into the air. 188,000 square kilometers of soils are at risk of damage and pollution. 470,000 hectares are mined. Hundreds of destroyed agricultural enterprises. Polluted rivers and seas. 3 million hectares of forest are covered by the war. War is Russia's contribution to climate change. The Russian war is destroying our planet, and its consequences are more catastrophic than the two world wars combined. Ukraine is cut off from the global export arena, due to which importers of the global south are forced to pay more for food. In the future, the closure of the grain corridor, which Russia wants, will lead to an increase in world prices by 10–15%. Russia makes a weaponization of food and weaponization of hunger. If Russia is not stopped, then over time everyone will feel the consequences of this war. Agriculture is one of the main branches of the economy of Ukraine, and it is able to restore its abilities. These are Kyiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, and Mykolaiv regions. After liberation by the armed forces of Ukraine, these territories returned to life. Despite the threat of shelling, Ukrainian farmers are rebuilding their businesses, going out into the fields and preparing for the new season. They risk their lives every day to feed you and us. Help us to stop Russian terror. Ukraine's victory means ensuring stability, well-being, and security for Europe and the global south. Demilitarization of the Black Sea is the real solution for freedom of navigation and secure freedom of export to feed the world.
Дякую за презентацію відео. Власне,
Thank you for showing us this video. We have also lit a candle of memory for the victims of Holodomor from the genocidal famine unleashed by Russia. Now I would like to give the floor to Ilya Neskhudovsky, who represents the ANTS, the National Interest Advocacy Network, who will present the findings of a study of the Russian war in Ukraine on global food security. We commemorate the tragedy that Ukraine endured decades ago and see Russia following the same pattern in order to assert their imperial delusional ambitions for the colonial expansion. They are prepared to unleash a genocide on the people living on the territories, and this way is also a way to terrorize the entire world. It poses a challenge for Ukraine as it poses a challenge for the entire world. In the 30s, Ukraine had been pillaged, grain was sold off for a profit to prepare for the war in order to fund a world dominance grab campaign. And this is the same that's happening now. Russia is manipulating the issue of grain in order to receive the funding to continue perpetuating this war. The situation is different, and Russia is now looting the Ukrainian regions. It had pillaged the grain from the occupied territories, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Kharkiv regions. Therefore, having manipulated the statistics, they show a record harvest, allegedly, in 2022 for no due reason. And they're using this looted wheat to offer it to the world as the savior of the world from hunger. This is the Ukrainian grain that Russia had stolen, and now it's offering it to the world. It shows, it is confirmed by a journalist investigation, which serve to prove that this had happened. The wheat was pillaged, exported, and then put on the global markets as yet another way to obtain a political lever, particularly on the African countries. Russia had orchestrated an African summit in order to weaponize food, weaponize grain, and use it as an advantage. In 2022, the grain was harvested because Ukrainians had risked their lives to grow it. Russia had pillaged the grain, posed that it had grown it, and created this illusion of stability. But the situation is very different now. We conducted a study, and I would like to bring you on the presentation, please. If we could have the presentation. So these were the events of 2022. What happened in 2023 when Russia failed to succeed in blackmailing the world? Russia resorted to different tactics. A few vectors of our studies have covered the war-affected areas, and we have studied the land that is now unusable, and that is 1/20 of the arable lands in Ukraine. Now they are beyond use for a number of reasons, such as it's used for the combat operations, or it can be mined, or it could be under heavy shelling. It's not arable because of the loss of the agricultural machinery that was either destroyed or looted by the Russians. So it's 20% of the potential. So as you can see on these slides, you can reflect the losses of the arable land. On this slide, you can see the direct losses. Those direct losses for the agriculture include a number of factors. It's always been a long cycle production. The machine takes a long time to pay off, and often it takes significant capital investment to bring it back. So a lot of agricultural machinery was lost. It was either destroyed, looted, and taken to Russia, and they overjoyed at looting. They enjoyed the fact that they had stolen the Ukrainian tractors and Ukrainian agricultural machinery. So this is the Russian modus operandi, looting the agricultural equipment. Second is hitting the granaries. They don't even pretend to disguise it. So this is a grain terrorism, and they do so in the open view of the world. In their TV channel, they openly announced that they had attacked the grain silos. These are not military facilities. There's no military equipment. There's nothing, just grain. Their objective is the grain.
Щоб влаштувати цей терор.
Their objective is a terror. Next slide, please. It's a decreasing number of active businesses, but we need to take into account that many businesses that operate in the occupied territories cannot close their businesses, and we will later see what happens in the territories that we occupy. We might see that there is no capital, no assets, no possibility to work, no employees. The next thing we researched is the consequences of Kahomka Dam destruction. The goal was not only ecocide, not only manifestation for the world. For quite some time, they were threatening with destroying not only Kakhovka Dam, but also Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. They were threatening with nuclear ecocide, but they chose another means. They destroyed Kakhovka Dam, and according to our calculations, water from this dam had to satisfy the needs of the population there for several years to come. But the problem is that a huge territory was benefiting from this irrigation, and after the destruction of the dam, these territories are not supplied with the necessary quantity of the water to conduct agricultural activities there. Of course, we cannot estimate the consequences, all the consequences, because these territories are under occupation, and we cannot assess what is really happening there, because Ukraine has control over the right bank of the Dnipro River, while the left bank required more irrigation. But we know that the consequences are huge. Next slide is where you can see an issue of occupied territories. It is unclear whether we will be able to use these territories after the occupation, because these territories are mined, and sometimes the territory is comparable to some European countries. It's 188 square kilometers. 150 square kilometers of soil is next to the front line. In addition, there is a matter of forest fires. Some forests have been destroyed there, and it will lead to climate changes. But of course, the main issue is demining. It's the task number one. I would like to express my gratitude to Ukrainian farmers. We lack machinery, we lack personnel for demining. It's a catastrophic lack, and we already know that to demine this whole territory, we will need at least 10 years to restore normal usage of the territory mined by Russia. But we know about numerous cases when the farmers having the machinery, they use start using this equipment to demine the territories on their own. They install special programs on their tractors and start demining the territories themselves. And this is something we can be proud of. We don't wait for help from anyone. These farmers understand that it is a matter of survival for them, so they do this to demine some territories, but it is not enough. It is absolutely not enough. There are still cases when people become victims of mine as well as machinery and other equipment. So, of course, we need more assistance.
Наступне це у нас що у нас змінилося по
Here you can see the changes in terms of planted areas and the cultures we grow.
наша частка в світовому
Ukraine still holds leading positions in many senses. For example, speaking about sunflower,
також значна частка по іншому
we export huge amounts of sunflower, and
відповідно, якщо би Росія
if Russia
не домовилися про зерновий коридор,
manages to
зерном була би зовсім інша.
arrange the exportation of grain, and if Russia agrees to exportation of grain from Ukraine, the situation would be better.
По бросовим цінам зіграла
Because
тільки в 2022 році.
what happened with in 2022 no longer takes place in 2023, and Ukraine puts a lot of efforts to continue exports. We involve our farmers, our carriers, we risk our lives,
Вони все ж таки
we continue transporting crops.
Далі.
Next slide, please.
На наступному слайді це питання вже логістики.
Here you can see the logistics issue.
Яким чином здійснювалося перевезення зерна? Ви можете
It's about how the crops are transported, and here you can see that 95% of agricultural products were transported by sea, and it allowed
наше зерно
us transporting the grain to other countries. And now the situation is further complicated because even despite huge efforts and despite the fact that the grain corridor partially restored its operation, it is still under shelling. It is still under risk of being shelled. The drones go to Odessa region, destroy ports, destroy elevators. And once again, I would like to emphasize that these are conscious actions committed by Russia, and they declare openly that it's a terror against Ukraine aimed at
для них є це
stopping Ukraine from exporting grains to the world markets. That's their goal. They cannot win on the battlefield, so they decide to commit genocide against Ukraine and the whole world.
світ, до речі,
They,
головна вимога, яку там починаємо.
by the way, the main condition from the Russian part is to lift sanctions so that they can get money from selling their crops. But we understand very well that once the sanctions are lifted, they start using it for their own economic benefits, not for exporting grain. They completely changed their budget allocations, and they increased the number of funds spent for the aggression. We have to understand it they don't want to stop, so they really need the funds. They can produce the weapons themselves, but they need this foreign capital, so they need the sanctions to be lifted. Here you can see the changes over the last year. The challenges are substantial, and they are related both to objective factors, but also to the fact that Russia keeps damaging our port infrastructure, silos. Thanks to the grain deal and those who work on grain logistics, we managed to transport grains, but risks are still too high. If Ukraine doesn't have the necessary weapons to destroy Russian vessels that target port infrastructure, if Ukraine doesn't have the air defense means, it's Russia declares quite openly that it is going to organize terror on Ukrainian territories during the coming winter, and they are going to target infrastructure facilities and ports in particular. So they accumulate the necessary number of missiles, drones, and other weaponry to organize this mass terror in winter. We need to understand it. And it is not only a problem for Ukraine, this is something the whole world will suffer from because the prices will change. The amount of grain on the world market will decrease, and for the poor countries, it will be a huge challenge that can lead to new rivalries and new destabilization on other territories. We have similar examples in history. Here on this graph, you can see the exports we organize and the dynamics of exports over the last time, and what's the current state and what has to be done. I don't have much time left, so let's speak about the conclusions. Even despite the huge efforts undertaken by Ukrainians in 2022-23 to ensure stable work of agricultural sector, to ensure logistics, and even despite the efforts from our partners, we are extremely grateful to the European Union who gave us an opportunity to export our products to other markets. It was a huge assistance that allowed us to survive. We are thankful for the agreements with some countries, with the United Nations, who made the operation of the Green Corridor possible. It's another important element for economic stability in the world. So even despite this, Russia started committing terrorist acts by destroying port infrastructure. Russia started destroying some routes to make it impossible for Ukrainian vessels to reach other countries. Russia keeps shelling the silos where the grain is kept so that there is nothing to sell. So the risks are very high, and if last year, the world didn't suffer from the blow it had to suffer from, taking into account what happens in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. In 2023, the probability is higher because there is nothing to be stolen in the occupied territories. The businesses don't work, and Russia declares openly that it keeps stealing the grain, and the representatives of local authorities just come to local enterprises, local businesses, and steal the grain. And of course, our farmers will not keep working in these conditions. It is a huge challenge. Moreover, there is another challenge related to the destruction of Kakhovka Dam, which means that some territories will not be supplied with the water. It will has an impact on yield, and we really would like our international partners to help us with demining, because it is tragic for our farmers, for their machinery, but also for the population. People are afraid to come back to their home, to their native localities, because there is still a danger of becoming victims of the mines. And very often Russians try to hide these mines. They act as terrorists. And after Kiev region was deoccupied, we found mines is children's toys and other simple things. So that's another reason why people don't come back, because these risks are huge. And if we want to ensure grain stability in the world, and if we want the whole world to have the necessary amount of grain, the victory of Ukraine is key here. It will allow for stable operation of agrarian sector. It will allow to ensure a stable operation of all the enterprises in this sector. It will secure the logistics, and for that we need weapons, we need machinery for demining. This is a key factor to ensure a stable operation of the sector. Thank you. Well, now we could hear about the current state of affairs in the sector in Ukraine. But of course, we need to know our history so that we see some parallels, so that we see things that repeat in 1932-33 and the things that happen now, to predict the possible next steps of the aggressor. And now I would like to give the floor to Dmitro Biley, who holds a PhD in historical sciences, who works in Institute of Historical Research, to talk about these parallels.
Thank you for the invitation. Very happy to join you. Indeed, now we are revisiting this tragic page in the Ukrainian history of Holodomor, as we find it very relevant. I remember the Six-Day War between the Israel and its neighbors, and the history of Holocaust became as relevant as ever. And the Minister of Defense of Israel said that we will not allow the second Holocaust. So now we are doing the same. When I talk to our defenders, when I read the lectures, when I make public addresses, I see how much this page in history resonates in them, because during the times of trial, people revisit their history and think, why did it happen? What did we fail to do to prevent this tragedy from happening? What lessons can we learn from history and from this tragedy? As Reinhard Koselleck, the German historian, said that it's the winners who write the history, but the defeated write the historiography when they really think deep into the problems. So now the topic of Holodomor is as relevant as ever. We need to think back and try to answer a number of questions that are vital for us. And that is who our adversary truly is. What is Russia about? So to understand history, we need to analyze the issue of food security, because history is a history of fighting for food resources. We just need to consider who manufactured the food, who controlled them, who distributed the food, and what use was made of the food. For Russia, the issue of food security, I will say Russia, and I've studied and I've been studying the history of Russia, so I've always been struck by one point. Russia has evolved in its statehood. It was first the Moscow kingdom, then Tsardom, the Russian Empire, then the Soviet Union. Now it's called the Russian Federation. So the titles have changed. The forms of the state have evolved, but the core fundamentals have remained unchanged, and that is dictatorship, a very strict hierarchy of government, absence of civil society, no economic market relations, and continued expansion, continued land grabs aimed at the neighboring countries. These features have remained unchanged. Richard Popes sarcastically said that Russia is a peace-loving country that, resulting from defensive wars, has expanded its territory hundredfold. We can see it now happening before our very eyes. And I will argue why there's connection between the genocidal Holodomor and the current event. In Russia, because of its climate, because of its rural population, famine was a common thing, because every year in a few was unproductive. And this was a lever for the government to control its peasantry and control it through hunger. It was easier to conscript peasants into the army then, as now. Ukrainians are much better warriors. There's no comparison, but it's an attrition war because Russia can keep conscripting more and more people, disregarding its human losses. And that has been the case through the Russian history, when they could use their ever-hungry populace and send them as cannon fodder to wars to try and capture the richer neighboring countries. Recalling 1919, a century ago, when the Red Bolshevik army conscripted in Russia attacked the Ukrainian territory to liberate, as they said, the Ukrainian peasants and workers from the bourgeois. They had a popular song, "It's good to live in Ukraine. There is good things to eat. There are good things to drink. This was their song then. And again, it stands true now. And at the apex of this policy, Stalin, because the Ukrainian People's Republic was defeated in its strive for independence since 1917 to 1921, being encircled by the enemies. And yet again, I would like to say that first time in the 700 years, Ukraine is now in a favorable geopolitical situation when we finally have allies, because throughout our history we've had to fight encircled by enemies at all fronts, at all quarters, and now we stand a chance because our neighboring countries, except the northern east, are our allies, and we feel their support and solidarity, and this is why we stand a chance to win, and I am absolutely certain that we shall prevail. So when Ukraine was occupied by the Soviet troops, there was an obsession with capturing Ukrainian territories. It was to grab the Ukrainian economic resources. Lenin in 2018 wrote that we want bread from Ukraine, more bread, and yet more bread. And million pounds of wheat were siphoned into Russia. Accordingly, the occupation resulted in Ukraine being treated as an endless source of resources, of food, economic resources, human resources, of course, and this is exactly Ukraine was seen throughout the evolution of the Russian state. And the second statement I would like to make, and that is the genocidal Holodomor of 2023-22 became a bifurcation point, not only for Ukraine, because the Holodomor and its consequences affected the second part of the 20th century. In short, let me speak about the consequences of Holodomor. It was a common practice of Russia to subdue the occupied territories. As Ukraine had resisted fiercely in early 40,000 Ukrainian people took to arms to fight against the Bolsheviks. They were confined to big cities. The rural communities had a number of insurrections when Ukrainians had fiercely resisted, and this was the Holodnyar, Hulai-Pola republics, and this resistance had to be crushed. They had to subdue Ukraine and place it under Moscow's control. So Russia or the Soviet Union, Moscow, the Kremlin, followed their usual practice, having much larger resources. There were up to 7 million people in the Red Army, and they had to be fed. So these resources were needed. And the idea of this world revolution, again, it's an imperialistic idea, because empire cannot exist unless it keeps expanding, unless it appropriates the innovations of that technology. Russia never had an intellectual basis. It failed to modernize its economy. It failed to change the tracks of its economy from perpetual expansion to the development of technology. It had to continue its life cycle of a shop, to keep floating. The same with empire, keep expanding. And this motor of the world revolution was a convenient imperialistic motor, as it was clear, no matter how big the communist empire is, it had to have its capital in Moscow, and for that they needed resources. They needed engineers, they needed production facilities, resources. Now, Russia is surviving by selling off its oil resources. What could the Soviet Union do then? It was also the time of the Great Depression. So, this was a twofold solution. On the one hand, access to unlimited resources, food resources, and in order to militarize and industrialize its economy. And the second objective was to crush the backbone of the Ukrainian resistance. Jumping ahead, I will say why, and many others feel that this was not a local history, it was a global history. By unleashing genocidal Holodomor, the Soviet Union transformed itself into a monster posing a threat to the world until 1991, until the end of the 80s, as it had appropriated those unlimited resources and then spread its tentacles around the world. If the Soviet Union hadn't converted itself into the armed monster, then Hitler wouldn't have come to power, because we know how much assistance the Soviet Union provided to militarize the Third Reich. Until 1944, the support for the Third Reich was ongoing and massive, and it was the Ukrainian grail, the coal, and much more. So I'm certain the Second World War would not have happened but for Holodomor. And now let's draw the parallel, why we say Holodomor was a genocide and why we see the parallels with what's happening currently. Raphael Lemkin, the international lawyer, introduced the international legal term stipulated in the Convention on Genocide. It is the mass atrocities against humanity and the punishment for the mass atrocities. This convention was enacted in 1848 at the session of the United Nations, and it had clearly formulated the criteria according to which we can interpret an event as genocide. Later on, Raphael Lemkin spoke in New York before the representatives of the Ukrainian diaspora. There were about 3,000 Ukrainians, many of whom had survived the Holodomor, had witnessed the Holodomor, knew about Holodomor, and Raphael Lemkin admitted that what had happened in Ukraine in 1832-33 was a classical case of genocide. He named the key criteria according to which we can gauge whether it is a genocidal event and whether genocide had happened in Ukraine. It first is destroying the foundation of the nation, and that is the peasantry. This is where the traditions are persevered, where the language, the culture endures, and the morale, the ethics, the key supplier of the intellectual potential, so destroying the foundation of the nation. And it was destroyed by famine. The second criteria is attacking the intellectuals of the nations. And we know the number of Ukrainian teachers, writers, academics, writers, artists were exterminated during Holodomor and then during the Soviet purchase. So it was a determined policy to eradicate the Ukrainian intellectuals. The third element of the genocide is destroying the soul of the nation, that is the religion, the church. The Soviet Union had had a policy of destroying the churches, of persecuting the clergy, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church were eradicated and others were eradicated, and instead the Soviet Patriarchy was put in. The fourth criteria of genocide is define the future of the nation by attacking the children, by deporting the children, displacing the children to other countries. By studying Holodomor, I have to deal with the heartbreaking documents when the villagers would take their children to the biggest cities, trying to allow them into orphanages because the children died by scores. These were the babies, the toddlers, and they died by thousands. So they would take the big mattresses and the covers, and dozens of baby corpses would be piled up and then dug in mass graves. It's something unthinkable. It's something heart-wrenching. This is how it happened when children were deported, when the future of the nation was attacked. And changing the ethnographical representation. So instead of those killed by hunger, and this was a policy, again, a centralized policy, say in Kuban, when over half of the Ukrainians were exterminated, then Marshal Tukhachevsky, who was in charge of the North Caucasian district, would bring in, instead of the exterminated Ukrainians, people from the Russian territories. So changing the demographical structure, the naming of the villages was altered, the same as it's now happening in the Russian Duma, saying that the Russian conscripts would be allowed to receive 2 hectares of land in Ukraine. So let us now draw the parallel. We know what's happening on the occupied territories these days. What happened before? Please see if you can find a difference. Destruction of the peasantry, the foundation of the nation. We've just seen and heard the findings of this survey. When the grain is attacked, I've returned from Odessa a week ago. There are 5 and 6 air raids a day, and the granaries, the port infrastructure are the prime target. My mother taught me to savor every little bit of bread because bread is holy. We would never allow a piece of bread to drop to the ground. It was the most cherished thing. So it's unthinkable for us to strike missiles at granaries because Ukrainians cherish bread religiously, because attacking the bread, attacking the Ukrainian intellectuals. Since 2014 in the occupied Donetsk, Luhansk, we know how many people ended up in torture chamber, were tortured to death, are still missing, were summarily executed, and this still carries on in the temporarily occupied territories. When the intellectuals are deliberately targeted and exterminated, people are forced to speak Russian. Children, Ukrainian children are forced to use Russian as their teaching language. We know that Putin I'm trying to use the most neutral word I can find, is now an international wanted criminal for the deportation of children, where thousands of children have been deported from Ukraine who have been orphaned. And this is again a deliberate policy, destroying the soul of the nation, the churches. We see what's happening. Since 2014, it's been ongoing when the Greek Catholic parishes have been persecuted. Ukrainian Autocephalous Church. We know about Protestant family in Slovenia that was brutally massacred with great venom, and changing the ethnographical structure when Russians are brought in en masse that are prepared to fight or willing to grab land and apartments. So the perils are obvious, and it proves that this is a genocide.
Я читав документ, от шантаж, так?
I
Я
read
емігрантську літературу 30
immigrant literature from 1932-33. I also examined Polish documents, and I can say that intelligence knew many facts. Polish intelligence worked well, and there were quite specific messages to the Western countries and immigrants who lived in Warsaw, in Prague back then, were saying that the prices dropped there in the places they lived. So the food was transported to the Eastern Europe to increase the Great Depression, when American farmers had to throw away their grains. The Polish intelligence have testimonies like that, saying that a huge truck comes to Poland, stops on the Polish territory, and starts leaving their meat, grain, and other food products. And we have to remember that at the same time, millions of Ukrainian rural populations were dying from hunger. Okay, so I'm giving the floor to somebody else. Excuse me for taking too much time. Thank you very much. It was indeed an interesting view on historical parallels, and everyone could draw their own conclusions and see that history repeats itself, and the aggressor state repeats the same actions. But now we can feel a bigger support from our allies and neighbors of our country, as well as the allies who are far from us, but provide substantial assistance. We will have an opportunity to ask questions to our speakers, but it will be after the third speech by an agrarian from Pokrova community, Chernihiv region, Valery Grigorenko, who joins us online and who will tell what challenges are faced by the farmers in terms of ensuring food security of Ukraine and the whole world. Valery, hello, can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you well. Hello again. Today we have the day number 639 of Ukrainian resistance to Russian aggression. Glory to Ukrainian people, glory to Ukraine. First of all, I would like to say that in addition to the destruction, the death, the pain caused by Russian aggression in Ukraine, we also started thinking about the issues nobody thought before the war. And in particular, it's the question of global food security, because nobody could even think that the permanent number of UN Security Council, the country who had to be guarantor of stability and security in the world, became a pirate, a criminal in the world. And the most cynical thing is that this country started using bread, grain, food products as weapons in attaining their aggressive objectives. And it creates damaging consequences for many countries in the south and in the east. So it's a blackmail. Russia is blackmailing the whole world with a famine. So everyone in the world has already understood that we need a new system of collective security, because the one that was based on the UN Security Council Charter failed. We need to reform and this system of security, but it's a question for other platforms and other speakers. I have the floor here as a representative of small and medium enterprises, as a farmer, and there are two points I would like to speak about. First, it's consequences of Russian aggression in Ukraine for Ukrainian agrarian sector, and what are the perspectives for the development of this sector in the future. The previous speakers already mentioned many consequences of Russian war, but as a producer, I would like to say that indeed, restoring and preserving grain corridor is a guarantee for global food security. This will allow us to provide bread and grain for poor countries, and it's also an opportunity for Ukraine to get revenues to the budget, and it will support employees in Ukraine, because that's what employees of different enterprises live from. And if for Ukraine, grain exports is an ultimate goal, I think that it starts from a producer, because to export something, we need to grow it first. I will not speak about agricultural holdings, especially those who benefit from foreign investments. Probably they have access to cheap credits from foreigners. I will speak about the small and medium producers and the challenges we faced since the beginning of the war. I will not complain, because it's difficult for everyone. And I will not say that we need some subventions, some benefits from the government. No. I would like to add to the consequences for agrarian sector. I would like to give two numbers. Comparing to 2021, the prices for agricultural products dropped for more than a half. And if we add the inflation of hryvnia, you understand that the farmers' income dropped significantly. And speaking about the perspectives for the development of agrarian sector, I think the only perspective is to survive. And one of the main conditions for the survival of small and medium enterprises in agricultural sector is access to free credits from the state. In 2022, the state launched the program for credits, and the rate was accessible, was quite comfortable for agrarians. First, they said that the state provided 100 guarantee, but then we found out that 50% of the sum of the credit should be provided by the farmer. This guarantee should be provided by the farmer, and it cannot be older than 5 years. So probably there are few farmers who can do it, who can provide their equipment, their machinery, their tractors, combines that were recently produced. So they couldn't get these funds they needed. And when I talk to representatives of parliamentary committee or other representatives of authorities, I always ask them to review this policy of providing credits. And to think about the institutions who help us with all the necessary means to grow crops. Another challenge faced by the small and medium enterprises is that starting from the 1st of January 2024, the legal entities will be entitled to buy plots of land up to 10,000 hectares of land. And my colleagues knew that I would have an opportunity to speak at this event, and they asked me to read a petition out loud, a petition that got many signatures from the farmers and other activists. And the farmers want to convey a message that today it's the most difficult time for Ukrainian farmers and agrarians, and every day they suffer from financial consequences due to logistical problems and block ports and low prices for grain. Russia keeps destroying ports and infrastructure of Ukraine. Huge territories are mined, and many enterprises are still under occupation. And a new challenge is another step of land reform, and all those who wish will be able to buy 10,000 hectares in Ukraine, and these changes will lead to destruction of small and medium agrarian enterprises. But it will also lead to bigger poverty of Ukrainian population, because Ukrainians will sell their lands almost for free. So the population will stay without plots of land they owned and without gains. We cannot benefit from credits. So, Mr. President, you said that small and medium enterprises are basis of Ukrainian economies, providing 7 million working places. Agrarians, representatives of business, ensure economic stability of the country since day one of the full-scale aggression. And under the current conditions, those involved in corruption will benefit from the development of events. So we urge you to support the armed forces and Ukrainian agrarians, and we urge you to preserve the current limit for the purchase of plots of land. And we also ask to submit these proposals to the Parliament of Ukraine and contribute to their fastest adoption. As you said, the state and the business have to work as a team, but not as two parallel worlds. I hope you will hear us and you will listen to the basis of agrarian sector of Ukraine. Thank you, Mr. Valery, and we also express gratitude to you for your contribution into the food security of Ukraine and the whole world, because since the grain is being exported, it's a contribution to the security of the whole world. Are there any questions from the audience to our speakers? Maybe you want to comment or suggest something. Yes, please. Hello, my name is Alexandra Dovmuka. I represent Center for International Security NGO. I have a short commentary, something to add to what was discussed today. I am very grateful for today's event. It's indeed a very important topic. And when I draw some parallels for myself between what was happening in 1933 and what's happening now, for me, it's first of all a matter of lack of punishment for Russia and possibility to repeat the same illegal activities. Russia decided that what she's doing is allowed and it can go on. So, as it was already mentioned, it's not only a problem for Ukraine, it's a problem of the whole world, democratic world primarily, and we need to repeat it and prove it to our international partners. We need to tell about the gravity of it. We need to underline that it's a precedent for other countries. They can use this example and behave in the same way in the future. They can use famine as a weapon, information as a weapon, resources as a weapon. They can get back to the time where we could see fight for resources as if we didn't live in 21st century. And it's a challenge not only for Ukraine, but for the whole world, and first of all, our European partners, because they also have an experience of coping with the consequences of humanitarian challenges in the world. They have a migration challenge, and we can see what's happening in the European Union against the background of what's happening all over the world. We can see the discussions that appear among the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. So it will be difficult to address it in the future. It will be difficult to solve new humanitarian crises and address their consequences for European community. So We urge our European and international partners to continue providing the assistance they already provide and invite other countries of the world to do the same, if it's possible, to help us with the humanitarian crisis, to keep helping us in terms of weapons, information, campaigns, economic recovery of Ukraine, demining. It's very important, and it's a guarantee of further stability not only in Ukraine but in the whole world. Thank you.
Дякую, Олександро, за запитання. І те, що ви
Thank you for the question, and thank you for initiating questions from the audience. I will give Dmytro a chance to have a short intervention, and then we'll take more questions. Surely, a professor told me when I was still studying history as a student that the historian needs to know the past and be able to predict the closest future. So indeed, if God forbid should Ukraine be occupied by Russia, it will not mean that Russia will stop at the Ukrainian border. It will suck out the human, economic, and food resources, and we should not delude ourselves that it will not continue its expansion further. So this Russian-Ukrainian war is by no means a local war. Again, it's a bifurcation point in the global history for the 21st century. For sure, this is something that we should see just as that. Thank you. This is exactly why we are saying that the Russian war against Ukraine will have a global impact, and food security is just one of the many impacts. I have a brief comment. Let me remind me the World War II, which was unleashed in 1839 by two countries, the Soviet War and the Nazi Germany. The Soviet Union was able to unleash World War II because in 1932 it had looted Ukraine, it had received the foreign currency from the Western countries, and with the money it bought the technology to manufacture weapons and ammunition. And then these arms were targeted to attack Poland, to attack Finland. Indeed, those two tyrannies had eventually clashed, and this is how it resulted. We know that the Eastern European countries ended up in Soviet occupation, even under some pretense of independence, but the Soviet troops were stationed in Eastern European countries after 1945, so we can draw inferences and know that the policy will be very much the same, because Russia today is the Soviet Union 2.0 with the imperialistic ambitions. I would like to mention the initiative of our NGO, ANTS, which is an advocacy campaign. We strive to make Ukraine better known in the world. So before the anniversary, we bought some books by James Mason, The Candle in the Window, telling the real story of genocidal Holodomor in Ukraine. So we will give the book to the first five people posing questions from the audience. Now we are ready for a question or comment.
Good afternoon.
Доброго дня.
From USAID. I would just like to thank you for this presentation. This work is very, very important. It's fair to say the world does not know enough about the terrors that Ukraine experienced in the 1920s and 1930s. Just speaking as an American, we in America certainly don't know enough about that history. And so the event that you're doing today, reminding us of what happened and making the connections between then and today is very, very important. So thank you for that. And thank you also for talking about the similarities between those two awful dictators. And recent work showed just how comfortable Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin were working together. They thought along many of the same lines. They were very comfortable working with each other, and we should not forget that. I wanted to thank you also for talking about the current challenges faced by Ukrainian agriculture, how this affects the Ukrainian economy, how it affects demography. At USAID, we're trying to do what we can to help farmers, to provide some temporary storage solutions, to also expand alternate ways of transport of grain, whether it's by train or by river barge. And I know that our European partners are doing the same thing. This is a very mighty challenge. And what we've done so far is obviously just a drop in the bucket, but we continue to work on this. And I just want to remind colleagues that our policymakers in Washington are working very, very hard to get additional resources to continue this work. So again, thank you for this event. It's very important that the world knows more about this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, and we're also grateful that US recognized Holodomor as a genocide against Ukrainian people, and of course we are grateful for all international support project and military support US provides to Ukraine, and we feel that we are really allies in this war, and we hope Democrats and Republicans will also continue the bipartisan support of Ukrainian people. The second question.
Доброго дня, Олександра
Good
Тимощук.
day, I'm Alexandra Timoshchuk. I would like to ask you the following question. If we consider the course of history and if we go back to the events that have cyclically unfolded, that have happened then, and now again we have come to a bifurcation, a turning point for Ukraine and for the entire world. So, can we change the course of history for Ukraine and for the entire world to turn this sequence of events, or are we doomed to be the hostages of the historic developments and we don't have the potential to alter this bifurcation point, to revive it, to rethink ourselves in the entire world? Firstly, I'd like to say that the situation now is drastically different from the situation then. Then the world was reeling after World War I. There were many problems, domestic problems, internal problems that the world was grappling with, and it allowed the Soviet Union to massacre Ukraine. The world denied the knowledge of what was happening in Ukraine. It denied the knowledge of the atrocities in Ukraine, and the journalists highlighting this were just silenced. Now the situation is drastically different. The world is seeing what Russia is perpetrating, the atrocities committed in the occupied territories, the genocide unleashed on the Ukrainian nation, on the Ukrainian children. Often we mention the prisoners of war, like Azov prisoners, but our children are equally prisoners in the indoctrination Russian camps. The world is different. The world is on our side. The aid isn't coming as soon as we'd like it to come. It's a challenge, as when we lose time, we lose the opportunity, and the aggressor builds stronger defense lines. that aren't so easy to breach any longer as it could have been, as we did in Kharkiv. So Russians are drawing lessons and digging in cement strong defenses using their potential. They mine kilometers of lands, accessing their own mining rates by sevenfold. So we are now enduring and drawing on the century-old lessons. We are learning this lesson again. I'm certain that we shall prevail in this war. The most important thing, and even though there are some single voices against supporting Ukraine, we don't see them in mass. Most of the world stands with Ukraine and not the aggressor. As for the future, to prevent it from happening again, as long as Russia has colonies to rob and loot that it had grabbed in the 18th and 19th century, by that I mean Siberia, as long it will amass the resources and use the resources to exercise its imperial ambitions and take revenge on those who hadn't submitted, those who hadn't kneeled. This is what enrages them. The country that hasn't succumbed to Russia is its enemy number one, the prime enemy. And also, Ukraine means too much for Russia because their history is very recent and they want to appropriate the Ukrainian history too. So after our victory, we need to ensure the autonomy of the Russian regions, or better, autonomy of Tatarstan, Yakutia, all those nations and territories that Russia had colonized, that in the 18th and the 19th century were far from West and were unimportant, but should become very important now. Thank you. We have more questions and comments. So Ukraine's victory and decolonizing Russia are the solutions to preventing the horrors from happening. And let's take one more question.
Thank you very much. My name is Javier Fuentes. I'm the counselor at the Embassy of Spain. Spain is currently holding the rotating EU presidency. I'm very delighted to be here today. I think it's a very timely event, so thank you very much to the organizers. Tomorrow we have the summit on food security happening here, and Spain will, of course, take part. And the whole issue of food security is, of course, an integral element of the peace in the conflict in Ukraine, as is reflected in the Zelensky peace formula. It is actually point number 2. I think it's also very important to highlight this, and we actively take part in that group as well. Now, since we are making parallels in history, it was very interesting to hear the speakers. I also wanted to draw a parallel with another milestone that we're celebrating here today, this week, which is the 10th anniversary of the Maidan uprising. And this indeed marked a very important turning point for the history of Ukraine. I remember very vividly those events. I was not in Ukraine, but I was already working with Ukraine from abroad, and that was, of course, due to the incapacity to sign the association agreement at that time, the unwillingness by the leadership. And we see that now Ukraine is a candidate country to the European Union, and this, I think, is an absolutely transformative event that will have consequences for the generations to come and the whole future of Ukraine. So answering also to the question that was posed before, I think this is an element, a fundamental element that we have to look ahead to. And in that sense, you can count on the support of EU member states and the EU as a whole to make the necessary reforms in order to continue down that path. Now, as regards food security, I just wanted to say that it is, of course, a challenge that has many interconnections. We highlighted the Grain from Ukraine initiative, to which we are, of course, contributing. It has very much linked to demining. We try to be present there as well. And the SMEs, it was very interesting to hear the farmer, the producer's voice. We are doing everything we can with international financial institutions in order to provide funding for small and medium enterprises. And I can only hope that this will trickle down very fast to those that need it. So I just wanted to say that you can continue counting on the support of Spain in this regard. And yeah, we look forward to working with you in this field. Thank you very much.
Thank you too. Also, as I know, Spain is important transit partner of Ukraine for transition of grain. In EU, you received maybe the most amount of this grain. And of course, during your presidency, we hope to receive demands on negotiation procedure and go forward to EU membership. And as you mentioned, it really starts 10 years and even earlier when Ukraine civil society shows that we want to be a European Union family and not Russian Soviet Union family, and that our values, our goals, and that what we are fighting for. So thank you once again. As I see, there is no, and the last question.
Thank you. It's a question and also a statement. My name is Larissa. I'm a representative of the Canadian Embassy. And of course, for Canada, this topic is also very important due to the huge diaspora living in Canada. And some of them were also immigrating after the devastating consequences for farmers of Holodomors. And Canada was one of the first countries to recognize Holodomor as a genocide of Ukrainian people back in 2008. And now Canada, this year, government of Canada committed to support the completion of construction of the Holodomor Museum in Kyiv. So we are closely following this topic, and thank you very much for this event and drawing all these parallels with today. I think my colleague also wanted to ask one of the questions.
Thank you, Larissa. Я, мабуть, скажу українською, щоб більшості було зрозуміло.
I will pose the question in Ukrainian. Thank you for the most interesting presentation. Thank you for this fundamental study. I wanted to follow up and say that Ukraine has allocated about $30 million to support the demining campaign in Ukraine, demining the arable lands. As part of that, I read some materials pertaining to the challenges faced by the Ukrainian farmers, no matter the size, that the cost of fertilizers had rocketed, that the cost of logistics had ramped up significantly. And because of the number of challenges, many farmers or farming enterprises decide to terminate their operations. So I'm seeing that the arable lands may shrink by a fifth next year. So I wanted to ask you about the projections for next year. Can you project the situation in agriculture for next year as it's yet another threat to global food security? Thank you. Thank you. Let me first mention the discussions that went on in Halifax about the support of Ukraine when our chairperson attended, Hanna Hubko. She's recovering from after the advocacy trips to the US, to Canada, as the tense discussions about support and the scope of support for Ukraine. So we're grateful to you for relaying the right messages about what's happening in Ukraine, so that your policymakers could relay it to their voters, who will decide how substantial the support will be. Going back to your question, as you've heard, the farmers are doing the impossible to continue growing even at a loss. 18% of the arable lands are inaccessible. So it's almost a fifth of the arable lands. It's hard to make any projections because manufacturing mineral fertilizers will factor on the energy resilience of Ukraine, and that will again be mirrored in the production of grain. It's not just the mineral fertilizers, it's the issue of selling grain, because the seaports are limited and the alternative routes have been blocked due to the Eastern European farmers' protests. So logistic costs are skyrocketing, and the farmers are in the red this year. They have made a loss. It's not just the fertilizers. It's not profitable any longer because of the number of logistical hubs, reloading, the access to the railway tracks, the access to the grain vessels, plus insurance. All that is making it a loss. If the major agri-traders are seeking loans, they need these loans not just to expand, but they hope that next year they can make a better outcome. But considering what's happening on the Polish border is detrimental to the interests of the entire European Union. And these protests happening at war is unacceptable. This is a bottleneck. This is a transportation bottleneck that gives us access to so many goods, and now it's blocked. We have studied the initiators, and they are pro-Russian and anti-Ukrainian, and this is truly detrimental. And to be honest, the response of the European Union and of Poland is very disconcerting. We thought that Poland would be our strongest friend because Poland had welcomed our refugees and provided us humanitarian and military support. And this came out when we are facing a harsh winter. The prices on gas are rising because it was channeled through Poland, the same on petrol and fuel. So these are artificially fabricated problems by a partner. Thank you. And Metro, I promise to give you a short comment. I can give you 30 seconds or a minute, or we can continue over coffee.
Відносно того, що нас очікує, взагалі.
I will add briefly about what awaits us. So what can be said? The so-called post-dam world system that was built since 1945 was undermined in 1991, and it started proving its ineffectiveness in 2014, because any world system is a system of balances and system of security, and since 2014 we have been observing the disbalance of this world security system. I cannot project what will happen next, but we have to be ready to the fact that the usual world, the stable world, will be destroyed. Many disruptive events will happen all over the world, and the sole foundation for us can be ethical and moral principles that do not change as long as the humanity exists. So we need to look for peaceful solutions, prevent aggression, and build relationships, new relationships that will be established according to the rules of world security. So I think that very serious changes await us. Thank you very much. Thanks to all participants for joining this important event about the history and the modern times of Ukraine.